When you finally stop chasing an avoidant person, when you withdraw your pursuit and redirect your energy toward your own healing and growth, something shifts in the dynamic that often triggers their return. They reach out after weeks or months of silence, testing whether you're still emotionally available, checking whether the door they closed might still be open. This return is predictable, almost scripted, because your absence activates the very attachment anxiety they've spent their relationship patterns avoiding. But what's less obvious is what the avoidant person actually wants to hear from you in this moment. Most people assume the avoidant wants declarations of continued love, expressions of willingness to try again, or reassurance that you've been waiting for them. But these responses, while they might temporarily satisfy the avoidant ego, actually trigger their defenses and lead to the same cycle of pursuit and withdrawal. What the avoidant person secretly wants to hear, what penetrates their defenses and creates genuine impact, is something entirely different and deeply counterintuitive. They want to hear that you understand them without judgment, that you've grown from the experience, that you hold no resentment toward them, and most importantly, that you've moved beyond needing them to be different than they are. These statements accomplish what pursuit never could. They demonstrate that you've genuinely released them while maintaining your dignity, that you've transformed pain into growth, that you see them clearly without the distortion of desperate hope. This combination of understanding, growth, gratitude, and firm boundaries creates profound dissonance in the avoidant person because it contradicts every assumption their defensive system is built upon. Understanding what to say, and more importantly, why these particular statements create the impact they do, reveals not just how to respond to an avoidance return, but how to complete your own healing by refusing to participate in the dynamics that kept you trapped. I finally understand why you couldn't show up, and I don't blame you. This statement is devastatingly effective because it accomplishes something the avoidant person desperately wants but rarely receives: understanding without judgment. Throughout the relationship and its ending, the avoidant person likely felt misunderstood, pressured, and implicitly or explicitly blamed for the relationship's failure. Your needs for consistency and emotional presence probably felt like accusations to them, constant reminders of their inadequacy. Your expressions of hurt when they withdrew likely triggered their guilt and defensiveness. Your attempts to make them understand your perspective probably felt like demands that they be different than they are. The avoidant person carries significant shame about their patterns, even if they cannot consciously access or acknowledge that shame. Deep down, they know their behavior hurts people. They recognize that their withdrawal and inconsistency create pain for partners who want more from them than they can provide. But this knowledge is so threatening to their self-image and so activating of their core wounds that they defend against it through various rationalizations. They tell themselves their partners are too needy. They convince themselves they just haven't found the right person. They frame their limitations as preferences rather than dysfunctions. These defenses protect them from the shame of recognizing the harm their patterns cause. When you tell them you understand why they couldn't show up and you don't blame them, you're offering something revolutionary: validation without enabling, compassion without pursuing, clarity without judgment. This statement communicates that you've developed genuine understanding of their attachment patterns and the fear driving those patterns. You're not saying their behavior was acceptable or that you'll tolerate it. You're saying you understand the internal experience that produced that behavior, and you hold compassion for the wounds that created their limitations. This understanding without blame dismantles the avoidant person's defensive need to make you the problem. When you blame them or express anger about their behavior, they can focus on defending themselves rather than examining their patterns. They can make the conversation about your unreasonable expectations rather than their limitations. But when you offer understanding and explicitly state you don't blame them, you remove the target for their defensiveness. There's nothing to defend against when you're not attacking. There's no justification needed when you're not demanding one. The statement also implicitly communicates that you've done work to understand attachment patterns, likely including examining your own. This demonstration of growth and insight positions you as someone who has evolved beyond the dynamic that characterized the relationship. The avoidant person recognizes, consciously or unconsciously, that you're speaking from a different place than you were during the relationship. You're not the pursuing anxious partner anymore. You've become someone with clarity and understanding, someone who has transformed pain into wisdom. This transformation is attractive to the avoidant person in ways they probably cannot articulate. Part of what made your previous pursuit overwhelming was the emotional intensity and the implicit demand that they change or show up differently. But this new version of you, the one who understands without needing anything from them, the one who has grown and healed, represents possibility without pressure. You're demonstrating that you've become the secure, grounded person they claim to want, while simultaneously making clear that this person is no longer available to them in the way they once could have had you. The "I understand why you couldn't show up" portion specifically addresses the avoidant person's deepest fear about themselves. That they're fundamentally broken or deficient, that something is wrong with them that prevents them from functioning in relationships the way others do. By acknowledging that they couldn't show up, rather than implying they chose not to or simply didn't care enough, you're recognizing their behavior is stemming from genuine limitation rather than from malice or indifference. This recognition allows them to feel seen in their struggle rather than judged for their failure. The avoidant person wants desperately to believe that someone understands that their withdrawal isn't personal rejection, that their inability to commit isn't lack of care, that their emotional unavailability isn't evidence they don't have feelings. They want someone to see that they're trapped in patterns they didn't consciously choose, patterns that were adaptive responses to childhood experiences, but that now prevent the very intimacy part of them craves. When you demonstrate this understanding, you're giving them a gift they've probably never received, being seen clearly in their limitation without being condemned for it. But the power of this statement lies in its pairing with, "and I don't blame you." The understanding alone might make the avoidant person feel relieved, but could also invite them to use your understanding as permission to continue their patterns. The explicit statement that you don't blame them does something different. It releases them from guilt, while also releasing yourself from the dynamic of blame and defense. You're not holding resentment. You're not making them the villain. You're acknowledging that they are who they are with limitations that prevented the relationship from working. And you've accepted this reality without bitterness. This release from blame is what the avoidant person has been seeking all along. They don't want to be the bad guy in the story. They don't want to carry guilt about hurting you. They want to believe that the relationship simply didn't work due to incompatibility rather than due to their dysfunction. But previous partners who offered this absolution usually did so from a place of continued hope and pursuit, which the avoidant person could sense and which undermined the message. When you offer understanding and release from blame while also making clear you've moved beyond the relationship, the message lands with completely different impact. The avoidant person hearing this statement experiences several simultaneous responses. There's relief at being understood and not blamed. There's recognition that you've evolved in ways that make you different from the person they left. There's curiosity about how you reached this place of understanding and compassion. There's a desire to explore whether this evolved version of you might be someone they could actually have a relationship with, given that you seem to understand and accept their limitations. And underneath all of this is the dawning awareness that this understanding and compassion you're offering is no longer available to them in the context of a romantic relationship, because the boundary you're setting is firm, even as your tone is kind. This combination of understanding their patterns and not blaming them for those patterns, while also making clear you won't accept those patterns in your life, is precisely what the avoidant person needs to hear. It validates their experience while not enabling their dysfunction. It shows compassion while maintaining boundaries. It demonstrates growth while refusing to return to dynamics that didn't serve you. The avoidant person wanted to be understood without being pursued, accepted without having to change, released from guilt without losing your presence in their life. This statement gives them the understanding and release they crave while making clear that acceptance of their patterns means acceptance that a relationship between you isn't possible. This paradox is what creates the statement's power and its lasting impact on the avoidant person. You were right that we weren't compatible, but not for the reasons you think. This statement is particularly effective because it validates the avoidant person's conclusion while reframing the reasoning in ways that challenge their defensive narrative. When the avoidant person ended things or created distance, they likely framed the incompatibility in terms that protected their ego and avoided examining their patterns. They probably suggested that you wanted different things, that your needs were too much, that the timing wasn't right, that you were better suited for someone else who could meet your needs. These explanations allowed them to end the relationship without taking full responsibility for their limitations. By agreeing that you weren't compatible, you're removing the need for them to defend their decision or justify their choice. You're not trying to convince them they were wrong, that you actually were compatible, that they should give the relationship another chance. This absence of pursuit is itself notable because it contradicts what the avoidant person expected. They anticipated that if they reached out, you would either express hurt and anger about their previous assessment, or you would try to argue that compatibility does exist if they would just try harder or give it another chance. Your agreement that compatibility didn't exist surprises them and creates an opening for them to actually hear what you say next. The reframe of, but not for the reasons you think, is where the statement's real power lies. This phrase signals that you have a different understanding of what made you incompatible, and it invites curiosity about your perspective without demanding they accept it. The avoidant person, having their conclusion validated, is more open to hearing your reasoning because you're not contradicting them, but rather offering an alternative interpretation of the same conclusion. What you say next should articulate the actual incompatibility. Not that you wanted too much or that your needs were excessive, but that you needed genuine emotional intimacy and consistent presence, while they needed distance and independence to feel safe. Not that the timing was wrong, but that they're not capable of the vulnerability partnership requires, and you're not willing to accept a relationship without that vulnerability. Not that you're better suited for different people, but that you need a partner who has done the work to heal their attachment wounds, and they haven't done that work and aren't currently willing to do it. This reframing accomplishes several important things. First, it challenges the avoidant person's defensive narrative without attacking them directly. You're not calling them dysfunctional or broken. You're stating clearly that their need for distance and your need for intimacy are genuinely incompatible needs, and no amount of compromise can bridge that gap without one or both people sacrificing essential parts of themselves. This framing is harder to argue with than accusations about their behavior, because you're acknowledging that different people have different capacities and needs, and yours simply don't align. Second, the reframe locates the incompatibility in fundamental differences in attachment capacity, rather than in superficial preferences or circumstances. This prevents the avoidant person from suggesting that a different approach or different timing might have made things work. You're making clear that the incompatibility is structural and rooted in who you both are at a core level, not in fixable surface issues. This clarity eliminates the ambiguity the avoidant person might try to exploit to keep you as a possibility without having to change anything about themselves. Third, the statement implicitly challenges the avoidant person to examine their patterns more honestly by locating incompatibility in their need for distance as a defense mechanism rather than as a healthy preference. You're naming their pattern without making it an accusation. You're saying, you need distance because vulnerability feels intolerable to you, and I need intimacy that requires vulnerability, so we're incompatible. This statement is both true and gently confrontational of the avoidant person's self-narrative, that their patterns are simply preferences rather than defenses. The avoidant person hearing this statement experiences cognitive dissonance. They wanted validation that they were right to end things, and you've given them that validation. But you've also introduced an interpretation of why things didn't work that doesn't allow them to blame you or circumstances. You're naming their patterns clearly while framing them as incompatibilities rather than failures. This is uncomfortable because it removes the easy explanations they've relied on while also preventing them from dismissing you as bitter or blaming. The statement also demonstrates that you've achieved clarity the avoidant person likely lacks. You understand the relationship's dynamics at a deeper level than they do. You can articulate why it didn't work in ways that are more accurate and insightful than their surface explanations. This demonstration of understanding and clarity positions you as someone who has done internal work and achieved perspective they haven't reached. The avoidant person recognizes, often unconsciously, that you've surpassed them in self-awareness and growth. And this recognition creates both attraction and discomfort. There's attraction because the avoidant person is drawn to people who seem to have their life together, who demonstrate emotional intelligence and self-awareness. But there's discomfort because your clarity highlights their lack of clarity. Your growth highlights their stagnation. Your honest assessment of the incompatibility challenges their comfortable rationalizations. The avoidant person might feel simultaneously drawn to engage with you more deeply to understand your perspective and defensive about the implications of what you're saying about them. The power of this statement is that it gives the avoidant person what they want: validation of their decision, while taking away what they don't deserve, the narrative that protects them from examining their patterns. You're agreeing you weren't compatible, while making clear that incompatibility stems from their limitations, not from your excessive needs. You're releasing them from the relationship while refusing to accept the story that makes them blameless and makes you the problem. This combination of validation and challenge, agreement and reframe, is precisely what creates lasting impact. I'm grateful for what you showed me about myself. This statement is transformative because it accomplishes something the avoidant person never expects. You're expressing gratitude for the experience with them, including the pain they caused. This gratitude is not about thanking them for hurting you or validating their behavior as acceptable. It's about demonstrating that you've transformed the experience into growth, that you've extracted value from what could have been simply wasted time and pain. This transformation from victim to student, from wounded to evolved, is evidence of emotional maturity and resilience that the avoidant person recognizes as rare and admirable. The gratitude you express should be specific and genuine, focused on the insights you gained about yourself through the relationship and its ending. Perhaps you learned about your own attachment patterns and anxious tendencies that the avoidant person's withdrawal triggered. Perhaps you discovered boundaries you needed to establish that you hadn't maintained before. Perhaps you recognized patterns in yourself of choosing emotionally unavailable people and began examining why. Perhaps you learned what you truly need in partnership by experiencing clearly what you don't need. All of these learnings are legitimate sources of gratitude that transform the relationship from painful failure into meaningful teacher. This expression of gratitude accomplishes several important things in the avoidant person's perception of you and the situation. First, it demonstrates that you're not trapped in victimhood or bitterness. You're not still angry at them or focused on what they did wrong. You've moved beyond blame into growth, beyond hurt into understanding. This evolution is attractive because it shows strength and resilience. It also removes the guilt the avoidant person might feel about having hurt you, which, ironically, makes them more open to actually examining their role in what happened rather than defending against your blame. Second, the gratitude reframes the relationship as valuable rather than regrettable. The avoidant person often worries that they waste people's time, that their inability to show up fully means the relationship was pointless or purely harmful to their partner. When you express genuine gratitude for what you learned, you're communicating that the time wasn't wasted from your perspective, that you extracted real value from the experience. This relieves the avoidant person of guilt while also denying them the narrative that you're a victim they damaged. You're not damaged, you're developed. You grew from the experience in ways that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Third, expressing gratitude for what the relationship showed you about yourself rather than about them keeps the focus where it belongs, on your own patterns and growth, rather than on trying to change them or make them see something about themselves. This self-focus demonstrates the kind of personal responsibility and growth orientation that characterizes secure attachment. The avoidant person recognizes, perhaps dimly, that you're operating from a different level of emotional maturity than most people they encounter. This recognition creates respect and often regret about not being able to meet you at that level. The specific phrase, "what you showed me about myself," is important because it acknowledges the avoidant person's role in your growth without making them responsible for that growth. They showed you things about yourself through their behavior and through the dynamics between you, but you did the work of looking at those things, processing them, and transforming them into growth. You're giving them credit for being a catalyst without giving them credit for the actual work of transformation, which was yours alone. This distinction matters because it maintains appropriate boundaries around whose work is whose, while acknowledging that relationships serve as mirrors that reveal our patterns. The avoidant person hearing this gratitude experiences several responses. There's relief that you're not angry or bitter, that you've moved beyond the pain they likely caused. There's respect for your ability to transform a difficult experience into growth. There's curiosity about what specifically you learned and how you did that work. And there's the dawning recognition that you've used the relationship as a springboard for development, while they've likely remained stuck in the same patterns, probably already recreating similar dynamics with new people. This last recognition, the contrast between your growth and their stagnation, is particularly powerful. The avoidant person sees that you've evolved while they haven't. You've done work to understand yourself better while they've continued avoiding self-examination. You've transformed pain into wisdom while they've moved on to repeat the same patterns elsewhere. This contrast highlights their lack of growth in ways that might actually motivate self-reflection, or at minimum creates a lasting impression that they lost someone who is doing important work on themselves. The gratitude statement also implicitly communicates that you don't need them to acknowledge, validate, or take responsibility for their behavior for you to heal and move forward. You've done that work independently of whether they ever see their patterns or apologize for their behavior. This independence from needing anything from them is the ultimate demonstration that you've genuinely released them. You're not waiting for their validation or hoping they'll realize what they lost. You've moved forward with or without their recognition of what happened between you. This release from needing anything from them is both what the avoidant person wants and what they fear. They want to be released from guilt and obligation, to know that you're okay without them, to be freed from having to take responsibility for the pain they caused. But they also fear being irrelevant, being so completely moved beyond that they don't matter anymore, being replaced in your emotional life by the growth work you've done. The gratitude statement gives them the release they want while activating the fear of irrelevance they don't want, creating internal tension that often leads to the avoidant person pursuing more intensely than they would if you expressed continued hurt or anger. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be with me. This final statement is perhaps the most powerful because it combines genuine goodwill with absolute finality. The first half of the statement, expressing hope that they find what they're looking for, communicates several important things. It shows that you hold no ill will toward them, despite the pain the relationship caused. It demonstrates that you've released any need for them to suffer or fail as a consequence of how they treated you. It indicates that you recognize they're on their own journey and you wish them well on that journey, even though it won't include you. This goodwill is rare and valuable, and the avoidant person recognizes it as such. The expression of hope for them also implicitly acknowledges that they're looking for something, that they have unmet needs and desires, even if they're not conscious of what those are or how to meet them. This acknowledgement is generous because it assumes good intent, assumes that their withdrawal wasn't malicious, but rather confused, searching for something they don't know how to find or allow. The avoidant person is indeed looking for something, usually for connection that feels safe, for intimacy without vulnerability, for relationship without the discomfort they associate with closeness. These desires are contradictory and impossible, but they're real, and your acknowledgement that they're seeking something validates their internal experience. But the power of this statement lies in its second half. But it won't be with me. This phrase is absolutely final and allows for no ambiguity or negotiation. You're not saying, not right now, or not unless things change, or not the way things were. You're saying, not with you, period. This finality is crucial because it removes all hope that the avoidant person might maintain access to you as a possibility for future reconnection. The door is not just closed, it's locked, and you're communicating clearly that you've moved beyond even wanting it to open again. This finality creates several important effects. First, it forces the avoidant person to actually feel the loss. Throughout the relationship and probably during its ending, the avoidant person maintained a psychological escape hatch, the belief that if they wanted to return or reconnect, you would be available. This belief, even if unconscious, prevented them from feeling the full weight of losing you because the loss felt temporary or reversible. Your absolute finality removes this escape hatch and forces them to confront that they've actually lost you permanently. Second, the finality challenges the avoidant person's core belief that they can have people in their life on their terms, maintaining distance when comfortable and reconnecting when convenient without consequences. Your statement communicates that their pattern of withdrawal and return won't work with you, that you're not available for the hot and cold dynamic they typically create. This boundary is one the avoidant person rarely encounters because most people remain available to them despite their inconsistency. And encountering it forces them to recognize that their patterns do have consequences, and those consequences can include permanent loss of access to people they care about. Third, the combination of goodwill and finality demonstrates the highest form of boundaries and self-respect. You're not ending things with anger or bitterness, which the avoidant person could interpret as you still being emotionally hooked. You're ending things with compassion and clarity, which demonstrates complete emotional resolution. You've processed your feelings, released resentment, and arrived at a place of genuine peace with the relationship's ending. This peace is attractive because it represents the kind of secure attachment the avoidant person claims to want, but it's also threatening because it's accompanied by absolute unavailability.